Alrighty, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about IEI. This is my type. This is, in case you don't know, introverted intuition first in the base position, extroverted ethics or FE in the creative position. So just for anyone coming from MBTI, this will not be the same as Socionics. Socionics is much more nuanced, much more thorough. So if you're curious to learn more about how nuanced and thorough it can be, just stay for the video. You might learn something. But alrighty, let's go ahead and get into it. First thing I want to do when I talk about these types is I want to go over their extroverted and introverted versions. So what I mean by that is each element has an extroverted and introverted version, and understanding these are central to understanding the type. And then of course I'll pull examples to explain how that arises in a type. So first things first, we have Ni as the base element. So what exactly does this mean? Well, keep in mind that intuition or it is abstract information in comparison to concrete information. So what do I mean by this? Well, concrete information is right here in front of us. It's the sensations, it's the environment, things that pertain to that. Whereas intuition is much more abstract, ideas, conceptual things. So what's the difference between extrovert intuition and introvert intuition? And this is where we see the key thing about IEIs. Extroverted intuition is more focused on diverging into a multitude of perspectives, ideas, alternatives. So this can be different ways that you can see extroverted intuition is even in simple things like looking at what you might be doing for the day or different things that someone could mean when they say something. This is extroverted intuition. Now, what it's doing is extroverted intuition is moving in a divergent manner. Okay, so the difference between extroverted intuition and introverted intuition is that introverted intuition, Ni, is moving in a convergent manner. It's bringing disparate ideas, possibilities, thoughts, and it's bringing them to a convergent point. Okay, now, not only that, but Ni also has a connection to Se. Okay, so I'm going to get into a little bit of that when we talk about the type, but that is the primary thing that we need to note about introverted intuition is it's abstract information moving in a convergent manner. Okay, now what does that mean? How does this show up in a person? So for the IEI, one thing to note is because their base element is intuition, introverted intuition, they're going to be very disconnected from their sensory environment and from extending their will into the environment. We'll get into that later. But they're very disconnected from their environment. And so this is something you'll see with IEIs often. They have a hard time keeping things in order. I mean, right now I'm looking at my desk. I've got a big mess over here, a book that's been sitting there for like over a week. Probably should be put back on the shelf. I've got this mug that I've been using I've been using the same mug, and what I've been doing is rewashing it every day. It's weird. I even have like this letter I need to mail in. There's this broken keyboard here. Like I'm not paying a lot of attention to what's going on in my environment very often, or even doing a very good job maintaining it. This is something you'll see. These types also have a little bit of a disconnect in noticing how they feel about some things, like whether or not they're hungry. This is common for these types. So their sensing is really low, and so most of their world, most of their life pertains to their, especially for an IEI, inner landscape. Okay, so alrighty, so that's the first thing to note. They're going to have a very difficult time managing the physical world. So this type will seem inadequate in a lot of ways, especially because they're missing a bit of practicality. That's their polar. We'll go into that later as well. But how are these different ways that we see this convergent process in IEIs? And when we take so one way we do this, and the best way that I can explain it to you, is through a color wheel. Okay, so when you take a color wheel, you have all of these different colors, and they all come together in the center in that white part of the color wheel. And so what you're seeing is you're seeing all this dynamic range and sense of color converge to a singular point. So when we look at the IEI, they're going to be very good at taking these disparate ideas and bringing them together into a centralized point. Seeing how things come together is central to introverted intuition. Um, Now, as we move into uh, other ways that this comes about, that is largely the way I'm describing it now is largely in the conceptual sense, but IEIs also get that information from extroverted sensation. So what do I mean by that? Well, um, not only do we understand not only do we understand how ideas converge together, but we also understand how events converge together. So this I can be looking at a series of events or a series of bits of information, and I will extrapolate what are the most likely things to happen in different scenarios. And so this is why introverted intuition often gets called time, right? It's because we do see that introverted intuition does a good job of taking um, events and recognizing how they will converge together through time. Okay, but not only do we do this in a forward type manner where we're converging what may happen in the future, but we also do it in the past as well. So the way this will often arise is saying, okay, why does this thing exist? Why is it that when I'm looking at this observation or this thing in my environment, what is its like function essentially? What's its purpose? Why is it here? What is it doing? Right? And so with an IEI, they'll do a pretty good job at taking an object and asking where it comes from and why it exists. So I'll give you an example of one that I've done myself. The emotion dissatisfaction is a central emotion to life. So what do I mean by this? And I don't want to get too abstract here, but I'm going to keep it short. The point is that everything that I have in my environment now, my camera, that I'm sitting here talking to you, that I'm uploading it to the internet, the air conditioning in my apartment, this coffee machine, all of these things that I have, including a lot of my knowledge, comes from dissatisfaction. If I weren't dissatisfied with how much I knew, if humanity wasn't dissatisfied with its conditions, we wouldn't have progressed and created new things. We wouldn't have progressed and created these things that support us in different ways. And so you can think most of the nice things in your life, you can thank dissatisfaction for those things. That emotion is central to humanity. It allows us to make progress, have progression in society. So can you see how in this example I've taken a thing like, what is this dissatisfaction attitude? Why is it important? What is this emotion for? What is its function? Why does it exist? And I've taken that emotion and said, okay, well, we can see that if we didn't have dissatisfaction, what would the world look like, right? I mean, if we didn't have it at all, it might even be difficult to say we'd even be alive, because we have to be dissatisfied with the feeling our bodies have when it tells us we're hungry in order to eat food. So if we just accepted that our bodies were hungry and just like weren't dissatisfied with that and went to look for food, we would probably not even exist, right? So dissatisfaction is central to our lives, and that is an example of what an IEI can do when going back in time. We can go forward in time by saying, what is it that is most likely to happen? And I have projections myself of what I think will happen in the long, long term. But then, I can also look back and say, well, these are the things that have brought this thing to existence. This is why this thing is here. So that's why it's called purpose and meaning as well, because we see that we're looking at the purpose of something. Why does this exist? What meaning does this have? And so that's another aspect of how abstract information moving in a convergent manner is can pull from the sensory and move into that convergent space. And that's how we can look forward, we can look backwards. This is why it's called time, but it's not only time, because of course, taking several other concepts and bringing them into a convergent space is something that introverted intuition does very easily. So that's something to consider as well. Hold on, I'm getting an itch. Alrighty. So that's the first thing that is most notable about the IEI, and I will comment on extroverted intuition here. For the IEI, extroverted intuition is in the ignoring position. Okay, so what does this mean for the IEI? Well, it means that extroverted intuition, because it's three-dimensional, because it's rather strong, will be very useful, and the IEI will use it often. However, it is dismissed for its own sake. In fact, extroverted intuition is only used to provide more information for introverted intuition, to enhance their view of introverted intuition. So this is going to be, I don't know if I can explain this. Essentially, if I'm looking at why something exists, I can say, okay, this thing right here, this concept, this idea, this event exists for this reason. And then extroverted intuition looks at different facets of this thing. But ultimately, for introverted intuition, it's only focused on why it exists, what brings it to this moment, what's significant about it. When an introverted intuitive looks at different ideas about history and different, I mean, for myself, I can think of all these different concepts like history and I mean, I say history and then I don't have any others, but basically anything you can think of, anything at all, and I'm only interested so far as it pertains to the greater meaning. So what do I mean by that? Well, everything that we have access to or can think of is part of life. Okay, even our ideas in themselves are part of the greater life. Okay, so all of these things arise in life, and so when I'm saying this, an IEI is focused not on the ideas themselves, but more so how those ideas pertain to life itself. Okay, so that's something you're going to see with them, and so all of these disparate concepts and ideas are interesting, and they will explore them, but only for the purpose of understanding the greater purpose and meaning of life itself, or bringing them together in a convergent manner. So, alrighty. Now, as we move to, so before I go to ethics, one thing to note is that people often think that the polar element, because it's so weak, or the blind element, the weakest element in our positioning, they often think that it's just as bad or not as easy to recognize as the ignoring, which is not true. You see with the ignoring, it is often put off, and there's a disinterest in it, but ultimately it is used rather well. You see my cute dog in the background. So that's the first thing to note about that. As we move on, we have ethics. So for a IEI, they're going to be valuing extroverted ethics, FE. So what is this? What is extroverted ethics, and what's the difference between FE and FI? Okay, so the primary difference between FE and FI is FE is expanding ethics, so it's moving beyond individuals, and it's focused on the emotional atmosphere. Okay, which is common to all individuals. Now, for FI, it's bringing it down to the individual, the subjects, and the focus is on one subject's relationship to another subject. So this is important to recognize as a primary difference. People who value FI are going to be focused on their relationship to others. And the way this arises can also be almost be seen as magnetism, or what you might call polarity. So what I mean by this is when you take two magnets and you try to push them together, but it's both the positive charge, you can't force them together. It's very difficult. And when you flip that magnet around, there's an attraction there, and trying to keep them apart can be difficult. So the thing is, people who value FI are very involved with this sense of charge. They're very involved with noticing the charge that they have between others. That can be a positive charge, that can be a negative charge, but whatever it may be, this is how they determine who they should keep as close friends. They'll bring in the people that they are that they have that attraction to, and they'll push out the people that they have that repulsion to. Whereas extroverted ethics is focused on the emotional atmosphere, on the emotional environment, and so it is independent to any particular subject. Um, so for an IEI, they're going to they also have demonstrative FI. So what does this mean? Well, the demonstrative is an element that is extremely strong for the IEI or for any type actually. The demonstrative element is four-dimensional. It's one of the strongest elements in the type, but then they don't value it, and what they value instead is um, their extroverted or introverted counterparts. So for IEI, that's instead of valuing introverted feeling or FI, they're valuing extroverted feeling or FE. So what you'll see with this type is that they process and recognize FI extremely well, and they recognize the polarity between others. However, they're more interested in converting this polarity to a atmosphere. So being independent to the individuals. Now, with FI, one thing I can tell you as an IEI that I experience FI as is almost like a disturbance in the forest. You see, because I don't value FI for itself. So, in the Star Wars movies when they say there's a disturbance in the force, or something like this. This is kind of how I experience FI myself. I'll be in a room, maybe at work or maybe with friends or whatever it may be, and then I recognize that there's a tension between two people. Okay, and to me, it's like this atmosphere was all fun, it was all light, it was clear, and then now there's this pull that I'm feeling in the atmosphere between others, and I notice there's this repulsion going on. And so to me, I feel that, and to me, I'm like, well, I need to clear this up. I need to make it more focused on the atmosphere. Now, one thing to point out is that obviously the IEI is noticing that sense of polarity, but doesn't care about engaging with it. Is more interested in lightening things up. So how does an IEI do this? And this is actually really central to the IEI. An IEI is interested in recognizing these differences, but what they do, the way they diffuse this tension between others, is by taking it off of the subject and taking it off the people and orient it towards the subject. Okay, so for example, two people are having this dispute, or there's this tension between them. For someone like myself, I'll notice this in the environment, and I'll likely get a little bit annoyed by it. I'll walk over and be like, "Hey guys, like, what are you guys talking about?" And I'll notice that they have this issue between one another, and so my thing is I need to figure out what this is. Now, I look at these two people and I ask them, "What are you saying here? What's going on here?" And this person as well, and I find out that the difference in their logical position is a difference in values. And so what I'll often do is say, "Oh, okay, so you're saying that you value these things, and this is why you think this. And you probably value that because of where you've been in the past, like you've probably experienced things like this, right?" And they're like, "Yeah." And then I go to the other person, I say, "Okay, and you're saying this, is that right?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay, so you're saying this because you value these things, right? And it's probably likely you've been through things like this." And they're like, "Yeah." So then it's like, "Oh, okay, interesting." And I can walk away and the conflict's gone. So the reason it's gone is because it's no longer about the people. It's about the topic. It's about recognizing differences, recognizing that there's two paths of life that have brought them to this moment, and that they have difference in preferences, and this is what created this polarity. So again, an IEI is not focused on, does not want to put the focus on it being about the people, but more so about the subject. How does this make sense? What's the argument that both people can take, and what's their differences in the argument? Is there a difference in values here? And why do you have those differences in values? If you can make sense of these things, the tension that's in the environment will relax. And so that's something you'll see with an IEI, and it goes back to the color wheel thing. You have two people on opposite ends of this color wheel. They may have a polarity against one another. And so what the IEI does is finds a way in which we can bring these things back together to a convergent point where we are now looking at similarities. And this is actually pretty important too. I'm going to type this right here so I don't forget it. Okay. So we'll talk about that later. We have extroverted ethics. So you're going to see with an IEI, they're not as focused on creating a atmosphere as say an EIE or an FE base. This is not their prime focus. In fact, most of the time, a IEI kind of considers it to be something that's secondary to them. They're more focused on their introverted intuition, and their most likely will be also very interested in their introverted logic, which is creating an understanding of the world. And for the FE, it's just going to be a support. So a support of communicating their ideas, of bringing people in and gathering people to be interested in what they have to say. This is something that IEI is going to do well. Another thing is, I've noticed that IEIs will often be very positive around people they don't know, like strangers. I've been, I mean, I've just noticed, like, for some reason, even for myself, I'll talk to someone I don't know, and it comes off very positive, very interested in them. And one thing that you'll notice with an IEI is that they have a lot of nuance and with navigating conversations and getting to know someone really well. And so an IEI may come off very friendly. I actually get this very often. People tell me that I'm if I say that someone doesn't like me, which people will be like, what? Like, why would they not like you? And it is very true, actually, that it's not common for people to have something against me. Typically, I get along with most people. There are very few that I can recall, but it does happen occasionally. So anyways, that's something you'll notice with them. They traverse that landscape rather easily, rather well, and so that's something to note. But however, they're a little bit less interested in maintaining that relationship, that bond that they've created with someone. It's more so like because that's not their focus, they just want to enjoy the atmosphere of the person. It's not something that they'll give a lot of thought to as to how to maintain it. In fact, something I find with myself is that if people expect me to do that, it often makes me disinterested in talking to them because I don't want to feel tied down or tied to a person, like I need to keep up with them. So that is something that you'll see with IEIs. They're pretty good at it. Can be confusing for people because they can be so good at bridging differences and so good at getting to know someone and things like that. And then next thing you know, they're like, they don't necessarily keep that relationship intact. So the person's like, well, what's going on here? But then when they talk to them, everything's fine. So it can be confusing for some people. Alrighty, so let's go into introverted logic. So one thing to note about IEIs is they have no extroverted logic. At least they do, but it's very, very, very bad. So when you compare the introverted logic, and extroverted logic, what you'll find with this type is introverted logic by itself, essentially. Not much processing of extroverted logic at all. And so what you find is someone who values remaining consistent, logically consistent, and building a framework in which they can navigate their lives. Now, the thing is, this will be very difficult for an IEI because they don't do a very good job at establishing principles or a logical consistency for their will, if that makes sense. So I probably should have gone into a little bit of what TI and TE is, so I'll do that very quickly. TE without TI is focused on keeping things open-ended. It's not focused on consistency at all. It's saying, well, each situation is different, and so we need to find out what works best for this situation. Whereas introverted logic types are saying, well, I'm going, essentially they're building a logically consistent framework that they can apply to every situation. So obviously they will come into situations that they didn't account for in their framework. And so they have to take that situation and they have to work it in or account for those differences. So that's something that you'll see with them. They're always refining that framework in which to approach things. Whereas for an IEI, they're good at building a framework, but it's only for their intuition. So as far as their ability to create a framework as a principle in which to live, or how to make decisions, how to make a framework concerning their individual will, is something that they're not very good at. It's something that I strive to be good at often. However, I'm very bad at it. So that's something that that you'll see with them. Their introverted logic is pretty useful, or pretty focused on their understanding of the world and that convergence that we see in reality or in ideas or in time. So making sense of those things is primary to the IEI, but as far as making sense of how they should go about making decisions in their life, that's something that they struggle with, and that's why they need their dual, the SLE, to come to a consistent set of principles to help them have that confidence. So that's important. Was there anything else there? I think that's good for now. If I think of anything, we'll come back to it. So, extroverted sensation. So for SE, oh, well, we could talk about TE. Let's do that. So one thing about IEIs is their lack of TE. So how does this arise? Well, a IEI does not have a good sense of TE as far as what things are more practical to do and what things aren't. Like they don't know what things are more efficient and what things aren't. In fact, it's so unapparent to them that it's insane. So, for example, I've been in situations many a times at my job or any of my jobs where this has come up as an issue. So, one way this has come up as an issue is I remember I was going to clean something. And of course, the way I approached this was saying, oh, well, this needed cleaning. I'll just get things that I think would be good for cleaning, or I think would be needed to clean this up, and I'll work on it. Now, I was cleaning a wall one time, and someone said, you know, you should be cleaning from top to bottom. And I was like, why? And they're like, well, because if you clean from top to bottom, then as you clean the top, it'll drip down, and whereas if you clean from bottom to top, you'll clean the bottom, and as you go up, it'll just drip back down, so you'll have to clean the bottom again. And I didn't even think of that. Like, to be honest with you, I didn't even see like how this was more practical. I mean, like that information had to be like thrown at me. I didn't get it. I didn't think about it. In fact, I didn't even think about what would be the most efficient way to clean. I just thought it needs to be clean, so all I need to do is direct my attention to this thing and clean it, and as long as it looks good, then the job's been done. So it wasn't about, what would be the best way to do it or what would be more time efficient or anything like that. It was just, I'm going to give my attention to this and work away at it until it's done. Um, and so you'll see that with an IEI, they don't have much sense of how to do things in a practical manner. They have a very limited sense of how to do it in a grand scale, like, okay, these things would be better or more would save us time. Uh, it's still really bad. But they'd be better at looking at it in a grand scale way rather than in their own life, practically speaking, or in their environment. Um, yeah, no, I am not very good at recognizing things for their efficiency, their practicality, anything like that. It's ridiculous. Um, and even when I do think on a large scale way, it's still bad. It's just better than better than my individual life. So I just have no sense. I don't really know what to tell you. I have no sense of what things are more practical. I have no sense of how to do things in an efficient manner. These things elude me. The only thing that I try to do is I hope to someday come to a consistent set of principles that I know are a way about living, essentially a guide in which I can live my life and be confident in that guide, that these are decisions that I can be comfortable navigating in the world, and that I know and have worked through a consistent set of principles that I can be confident is the best way to make decisions. And that is something that I admire in other people, and I want to be able to do myself, but it's something that I even struggle with that. So it's not even about making decisions in a practical sense. It's just more so focused on making decisions that I can believe in, right? Um, Rather than just doing it as it comes. So that's an important aspect of the IEI. Another thing that we can get back into is what it means to have a lack of SE and SI. So the the difference between SE and SI is extrovert sensation is focused on extending one's will into the environment, whereas SI is or expanding their sense of influence, whereas SI is um, recognizing the influence between several things and looking to reduce their effect, I guess you could say, on a lot of these things. So what do I mean by this? Well, um, for these are two different attitudes to the environment. Extroverted sensation is an attitude of expanding their realm of influence and creating an effect on the environment. So um, when you look at this in a few different ways, you'll see with people who like, let's say you imagine like someone who's important who walks through a room. Um, People will turn to look at this person, and it's like they command attention, or either they command attention or maybe everyone gets back to work. They're all like, oh no, I need to get back to work, because this person's walking through the room and they have an effect on the environment. So that noticeable effect that they have on the environment is something that is a good example of extrovert sensation. um, and typically extrovert sensation types are looking to expand that sense of influence. So oftentimes anything that presents itself as a threat to that sense of extroverted sensation is going to be, or their influence is going to be something that they'll fight or knock down. So um, I'm getting a little bit, this isn't how it arises in IEI per se, but that is something that extrovert sensation types are looking to do. So it often becomes a conflict against their environment. They're looking to overcome any obstacle that presents itself in the way of an SC type. Whereas SI is much more focused on reducing that effect. It's an attitude of the environment of saying, what's the easiest way to do things that I don't meet a lot of resistance? Um, I don't create a lot of friction. The smoothest way to do something possible. Um, and whereas, like for them, why is it something to do? Why is it something that they would look to do if it creates a big mess or a big uh, or if it infringes on their environment too much? So that is something that SI types are going to be either one, trying to find they won't do it, they won't approach it, or two, they'll try to do it in a way that delineates that massive effect. So or sense of resistance. They want to do it in the easiest, smoothest way possible. So that's something that you'll see with SI versus SE. How does this happen in an IEI? Well, obviously, because it's weaker, it's not going to have as much an effect. We're going to see that IEIs, the one thing that they are very bad at, their suggestive element that they want to improve, is enforcing their will in the environment, or creating change in the environment. And IEI is pretty oblivious to this, as they're mostly caught up in their internal landscape, but they do want to create an effect on the world, especially someone who sees how things are going to unfold and what things are important for the future. This can be something that an IEI really wants to do. Like, how can I make decisions that will create that effect on the world? And so having that effect, having that influence is something that's very important for an IEI. And so oftentimes, because they're tied with NI and FE, they're going to want to be their ideas to be heard and listened to, because they consider them to be important and they think that influence will carry on. So that's something that you'll see with IEIs. Oftentimes their slant towards creating an effect is more so one of being heard and recognized as having something important to say. So that is something that is pretty central to them too. So yeah, they'll struggle to create an effect. They'll struggle to inflict their will on the environment. And they'll struggle with opposition. If something's too challenging or too difficult, an IEI will struggle with those kinds of things. So that is something that they'll that they need help with, or they need someone to push them into action. So this is something that an SE base can be really helpful for. Their dual, the SLE, can be really helpful in pushing them to accomplish what they need to accomplish, or even helping them do it. So that's something that's pretty key, pretty central. Now, the role element is introverted sensation. So for them, the role element's a little bit stronger. I call this the adaptive element. It's a little bit stronger. It has a little bit more influence on the type. So with an IEI, it's going to be it's more likely that you'll see them as much smoother, not creating a dramatic effect on the environment, but it's something they want. It's something they have to kind of push through their role element in order to access that extrovert sensation, and inflicting their will and creating change. Oftentimes, in fact, you'll see IEIs are very spiritual types. They're, like I said earlier, how does everything pertain to life? Like everything exists in life, and so when I look at an object, I'm only interested so far as it pertains to how it fits into everything else. So that is something that is very central to an IEI. And so when you look at these types, their SE tends to be a lot lower, because they are, a lot of times they can be a lot more accepting of the world as it is. And so remember what I said earlier, dissatisfaction is important for creating change. So if an IEI can see the purpose in everything that exists, then they'll validate everything. And then, and this is actually an initial growth point for an IEI. Initially, they'll validate everything in the world, and so this is why we see types like enlightened beings typically being IEI. They're not engaging with their sense of self or identity or ego, whereas like an SLE has a very strong sense of their identity or ego, and they've worked and constructed it to be very very nuanced to account for different variables and things that they need to like a principle of living. And so for an IEI, because they'll accept the world, or see the meaning in everything that exists, it will often take from that sense of what needs to happen to inflict on the environment. It will be a growth point for them to validate their sense of subjectivity. So, initially it's easier to validate the external world and not validate the internal dissatisfactions with the world, to project that onto the environment. So that was a growth point for me, and actually it was something that my dual helped me come to realize, is that this push against the world, this dissatisfaction with the way things are, is a central component to the world itself. So I'm making this video extremely long. It is my type, so I have an excuse. Um, so yeah, that's something that will be a growth point for an IEI type. Now, um, I think that one final thing to mention about SI SE is that an IEI they're primarily going to be engaged in NI. So because SI is opposite to NI, you're going to see that when they engage, they can direct their focus to SI for a short time, but their standard mode of operating is in the internal landscape. So an introverted intuition. So noticing how they feel, noticing their bodily sensations, things like that, something they can direct their attention to, but it has to temporarily shut off NI in order to do so. Um, so that is pretty significant to them. So yeah, that's also obviously they're going to have a hard time with their environment, keeping things in check, making sure that they have like I do enough that I don't ignore like basic things like hygiene and stuff like that. I know that some SI polar types struggle with this. Um, I do all those things, but as far as like cleaning my room, keeping it in check, making sure my environment's tidy, these are things that I will do in long periods of time. Like it'll take me a long time before I get to it. Um, I'll wait until it's necessary, things like that. So yeah, and yeah, so that's something that they'll struggle with as well. Some last notes I want to make about the IEI. I know this is a long ass video. Um, there's this connotation people get about IEIs that they're submissive, and I want to comment on this because this is something I see as a problem in the community. As far as IEIs go, it's true that they won't have a very nuanced sense of their individual will and extending that onto the environment. However, some people assume that this means that, and sexually speaking, IEIs will be submissive types. And I've actually been spoken to this way simply because of my type. Someone hears what my type is and assumes that I am this way and even has spoken to me in this way, which, to be honest with you, really set me off. And they got a look of what my SE looks like when I'm when I feel like a boundary's been crossed. Yeah, but that's something that I want to address here because that's not something that is necessarily the case. In fact, I've heard that typically types sexually don't express themselves in the way that you might expect based on their quadra. A lot of types will do so in a way that actually seems contrary to their quadra values. So that's something I want to point out there. I think sexuality and things of that nature are often their own aspect of an individual, and may have some correlations to type, but not necessarily completely. And what I mean by that is that even IEIs with a very bad sense of SE, they can still want that one thing in their life that they have control over or feel like they have control over. And that's something that for myself I value a lot is having some places in my life where I do feel in control. And so for SE types, sometimes it can be relaxing or it can be a nice thing for them to not have to worry about things or relinquish their control. And so that's something that I think is important to recognize too. And also, it's not like one thing to consider always is like gender roles as well. So I just want to say that that's something that it's kind of annoying. And I hear Galenko supports that. So, I've got what do they call it? What's that saying? I've got a something to pick with him. Yeah, I got a problem with that, basically. Okay. They're going to be focused on narrative type orientation as well, II as well. Last few things I have here. SLE II values. Wow, this is a long video. SLE II values, you're going to see an IEI is very both SLE and IEI are really, really focused on removing the sense of dislike for other people. They can dislike someone a little bit, or they can be annoyed by somebody, but typically the SLE and the IEI are going to share the values of, in a sense, removing FI, in a sense, saying like this sense of dislike for somebody, or this lack of respect people have for each other simply because of their differences is something that SLE and IEI are going to care a lot about. Having essentially for them, having a base level of respect for everyone, and then we all operate on top of that. So we can be very different, and we can have very different approaches. And even if, because of war, for example, we have to have a distaste to one another because of what we're doing or participating or engaging in, like if there's two sides of a war. And SLE and IEI, they're still going to have a foundational, basic level of respect for the opponent. And it's only the conditions of life that have brought them to this point of conflict. So that's something you'll see. Those are values that are universal to those types. Yeah, so that's something that you'll see with them. They don't. Yeah, they don't value that type of thing. They really want to keep things on a base level of respect. A place you can see this is in The Last Samurai. I feel like was a great illustration of this. The main character the main character killed this man, and then they moved him in with that man's wife as a visitor, and that was now her house guest. And like, for their culture, for her to have a problem with him was disrespectful, because for one, the man died honorably, but two, they were bringing that man in as a guest, and so she should be honored to have him as a guest. So this sense of personal relation is something that is in that movie is illustrated to be put to the side, and it's actually, in my opinion, extremely powerful, because in that movie they later come to love each other and appreciate each other as their own kind of family, and that's something that I feel like is a great example of SLE IEI values. IEI is also very different to the beta quadra in a whole, and this is the last thing I have to say about this. IEI is also very different to beta quadra in a whole, because beta quadra is typically very pushy on everyone else, very ride or die type of extremism that we see with them. They can be they're a very intense quadra, whereas the IEI comes off as that, in a way, that relief from the intensity of the environment. They have a little bit stronger SI to give them a more calm expression, and so this is oftentimes what can bridge the delta and beta quadras, because the IEI comes off so much calmer, so much more, in a way you could say, diplomatic and personable. So yeah, that's a primary difference with them. But one thing you'll see as a commonality is that IEIs are focused on that sense of like cultism. You'll see this a lot. Beta quadra like values essentially form themselves into a cult-like structure. Very, very common for beta quadra. The way they would organize themselves as a group will appear very cult-like, and they'll often organize things that look very cult-like as well. And this is something that IEIs do also. So they're just focused more on the bigger reality sense rather than the, I mean, I love thinking about that kind of thing. I love thinking about societal structure and like building your own culture, and those are things that fascinate me. So, anyways, I think that is all I have to say. This is a 50-minute video on IEI. I should have given you guys a forewarning to just play it on ×2 or ×3 or something. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys watching the video. Remember, we have a Discord community where we talk about Socionics. even attitudinal psyche, MBTI, all kinds of different things there. So, as well as spirituality, philosophy. So it's a really great community. We even play video games together. We like listen to music together. It's a pretty great community. I highly recommend it. It's called Hex. That is our Discord community. So go ahead and check down in the description below the link to get in. And also, I do typing sessions. So if you are interested in getting typed by me, you can go down below and you can schedule a time with me. Of course, it does cost. So look at the cost before you schedule. But yeah, thanks for contributing. Hopefully you liked the video. Give it a like, subscribe, and send it to somebody if you liked what you heard and found it informative. That would be really, really helpful. So yeah, all right. You guys have a beautiful day. Thanks for watching. Peace.